Pompeii seemed eternal, a city of merchants and senators, of bakeries and bathhouses, of laughter echoing through painted courtyards beneath the shadow of a mountain no one feared. Its streets were carved deep with the grooves of 10,000 cartwheels. Its walls blazed with advertisements, love poems, and political slogans. Its citizens woke each morning, ate their bread, argued over prices in the market, and went to sleep, never once believing tomorrow would be any different. Welcome to sleepy, ancient history. Why does a city frozen in a single afternoon feel more alive than most cities still breathing today? Why does its silence speak louder than any history book? Tonight, we will explore how one mountain reshaped our understanding of the ancient world, and why Pompeii is not just a city that was destroyed, but a city that was saved by destruction. These questions about preservation and loss, about the ordinary days that history forgets, have echoed for nearly 2,000 years. A gentle subscribe, like, or sharing your thoughts creates a pathway for more history lovers to discover this sanctuary and brings us closer to protecting this space, one sleepy soul at a time. Wherever you are right now, perhaps imagining that ancient city beneath its blanket of ash, allow yourself to rest in this stillness. We will journey through 100 ancient facts about Pompeii, from the bustling forum where politicians argued and merchants haggled, to the painted walls of homes that held portraits of families now gone, to the final hours when the mountain spoke and changed everything. Close your eyes and breathe deeply. Feel the weight of your body against this earth where ancient cities once hummed with life. Thousands of years separate you from those Pompeian streets, yet you rest on the same ground. Breathe air that moved through the same skies. Breathe slowly. And now, let us step back to a city very much alive, to the morning before the afternoon that changed everything, when bread was still baking, and the mountain was just a mountain. Pompeii was not a small village caught off guard. It was one of the most important cities in the Roman world. Before the eruption of 79 AD, Pompeii covered roughly 170 acres, about the size of 100 to 30 American football fields, and supported a population historians now estimate at between 11,000 and 20,000 people, depending on whether one counts only the city proper or the wider surrounding countryside as well. It sat at the southeastern foot of Mount Vesuvius, approximately 14 miles from Naples, at a position that made it a critical trading hub, connecting the fertile agricultural lands of Campania to the sea routes of the Mediterranean. The city had its own government, its own elected officials, its own amphitheater capable of holding 20,000 spectators, its own law courts, temples, public baths, markets, and an elaborate water system that drew from a distant aqueduct. Pompeii, in short, was a functioning metropolis of the ancient world. That such a complete world could be erased in a single afternoon, and then preserved almost intact beneath the ash, is one of history's most remarkable paradoxes. The land beneath Pompeii has been inhabited for far longer than most visitors realize. The earliest settlements in the area date to around the 8th century BC, when a population known as the Oscans, a people of central Italy, founded several small villages near the Sarno River. The Greeks arrived in the Campania region around 740 BC, and with them came new architectural ideas, new religious practices, and new trade connections. one of Pompeii's oldest surviving structures, a Doric temple dedicated to Apollo, reflects this early Greek influence and still stands, in fragmentary form, in what would later become the city's triangular forum. Over subsequent centuries, Pompeii passed through Etruscan, Samnite, and finally Roman hands. Each culture left its mark, which is why the city, unearthed by archaeologists, is not purely Roman. It is a layered conversation between civilizations, each generation building upon the bones of the one before. By the time of the eruption, Pompeii had already been a significant settlement for roughly 800 years. Pompeii became a Roman colony in 80 BC, following a military siege that left deep marks on the city. When allied Italian cities rose against Rome during the Social War, a conflict running from 91 to 87 BC, Pompeii sided with Rome's enemies. The Roman general Sulla eventually besieged the city and forced its surrender. As part of the settlement, Sulla installed a large number of Roman veterans inside Pompeii's walls, creating a Roman colony called Colonia Cornelia Veneria Pompeianorum. The name itself tells a story. Cornelia honored Sulla's family. Veneria honored Venus, whom Sulla considered his divine patron. The introduction of Roman colonists, alongside the existing Oscan-speaking population, created social tensions that historians believe persisted for generations. Latin replaced Oscan as the official language. New Roman-style buildings rose beside older Samnite structures. This collision of cultures is one reason Pompeii's buildings and graffiti display such a fascinating mixture of languages, traditions, and artistic styles, all compressed into the single snapshot the eruption preserved. The city's economy was powered by three forces: agriculture, trade, and manufacturing, and archaeological evidence suggests it excelled at all three. Pompeii sat at the center of one of the most fertile agricultural regions in the ancient world. The volcanic soil surrounding Vesuvius was extraordinarily rich, and the vineyards of Campania produced wines traded across the Roman Empire. Archaeologists have found ceramic storage vessels stamped with Pompeian origins throughout the Mediterranean, from Spain to Egypt. The city was also known for the production of garum, a fermented fish sauce that was the ancient world's most widely used condiment. Pompeian garum factories processed enormous quantities of fish, primarily anchovies from the Bay of Naples, fermenting them in large stone vats. One Pompeian garum producer, a man named Aulus Umbricius Scaurus, was wealthy enough to decorate his home's floor with elaborate mosaics advertising his product. Evidence also suggests that by 79 AD, Pompeii was a center of the textile industry, processing and dyeing wool in large workshops called Fulonicae. Pompeii's streets were a form of living engineering, hiding a thoroughly practical city beneath their worn surfaces. Anyone walking Pompeian streets today notices immediately the large stepping stones that cross the intersections. Irregular blocks of dark lava, slightly raised above the road surface. These were not decorative. Pompeii's streets doubled as drainage channels, with water flowing along their centers. The stepping stones allowed pedestrians to cross without wetting their feet, while leaving gaps sized to allow cartwheels to pass between them. The streets themselves were paved with large polygonal basalt blocks, worn smooth by centuries of traffic. The wheel ruts carved into this stone are still visible today, deep grooves in the lava that mark the passage of uncountable carts across decades. The city also had raised sidewalks on most major streets, protecting pedestrians from traffic and providing merchants with space to display goods outside their shops. Pompeii had a remarkably sophisticated water supply system for its time. Fresh water reached the city through an aqueduct originating in the Sereno Springs, located about 16 miles inland. This aqueduct connected to a large water distribution tower near the Vesuvius Gate, from which lead pipes carried water under pressure throughout the city. The system operated on a hierarchy. Public fountains received water first, private baths second, and wealthy private homes last. Archaeologists have counted over 40 public fountains distributed throughout Pompeii, spaced so that no citizen ever had to walk more than about 320 feet to reach fresh water. The sophistication of this system is such that modern engineers, studying Pompeii's plumbing, have drawn lessons applicable to contemporary water infrastructure design. Archaeological evidence suggests that most residents of Pompeii did not have dedicated cooking spaces in their homes. For the majority of the city's population, daily meals came from the thermopolia, the ancient equivalent of a fast food counter. Archaeologists have identified at least 80 thermopolia in Pompeii. These establishments featured stone counters with large ceramic vessels embedded directly into them, kept warm by smoldering charcoal beneath. Hot food was ladled from these vessels. In 2021, excavators working in the Reggio V district uncovered an exceptionally well-preserved thermopolium with vibrant painted frescoes still intact, including depictions of the animals whose meat was sold there. Analysis of residue inside the food vessels revealed traces of duck bone, pork, goat, fish, snails, and various spices. A menu that would not look entirely out of place in a modern Mediterranean kitchen. The public baths of Pompeii were not simply places to get clean. They were the social heart of the city. Pompeii contained multiple large bathing complexes: the Forum Baths, the Stabian Baths, the Central Baths, and several smaller establishments all served the public. Entry fees were extremely low. The baths offered a sequence of experiences: the changing room, the cold plunge pool, the warm intermediate room, and the hot room, heated by a system that circulated warm air beneath the raised floor and through hollow walls. People visited the baths not merely to wash, but to socialize, conduct business, hear news, exercise, and linger. Ancient writers noted the sounds of splashing, conversation, and vendors. The baths were loud, crowded, democratic spaces where senators and freedmen stood in the same steam. Historians believe that for many Pompeians, the baths were the primary place where community was built and maintained. The walls of Pompeii were covered in thousands of inscriptions, and they give historians a rare, unfiltered view of ordinary Roman life. Archaeologists have catalogued more than 11,000 graffiti inscriptions from Pompeii's walls, columns, and public spaces. They range from electoral endorsements to love declarations, crude jokes, boasts, insults, riddles, and quoted passages from literature. Some inscriptions advertise businesses or upcoming gladiatorial games. Others record simple facts: a name, a date, the record of a meal. Among the more personal examples, one inscription reads simply, "I was here," Another records what appears to be a child practicing the alphabet. One wall near a bathhouse preserves a list of names and amounts, which historians believe was a running tally of debts between friends or business partners. These inscriptions are not curated literature produced for posterity. They are the unmediated everyday language of a functioning city, covering the full range of human expression across every social level. And so, already, a pattern is beginning to emerge. Pompeii was not exceptional because it was extraordinary. It was exceptional because it was ordinary. Most ancient cities are known only through what their elites chose to preserve. Official histories, law codes, temple dedications, the words of generals and emperors. Pompeii gives us something far rarer. The groceries someone forgot to put away. The bread left in the oven when the baker ran. The election graffiti, written by a neighbor trying to do a friend a favor. The city's remarkable preservation means that, for once, the common person of the ancient world has a voice. Civilization is not built only by those who make history. It is built by the 10,000 ordinary mornings before the one afternoon that changes everything. Pompeii's political system was, for its time, notably participatory, at least for free adult males. The city was governed by two chief magistrates called duoviri, elected annually by the free male population. Below them were aediles, who oversaw public buildings, markets, weights and measures, and the organization of public games. There was also a town council composed of roughly 100 former magistrates who served for life. Elections were openly contested. The walls of Pompeii preserve hundreds of electoral endorsements painted in red letters on white plaster. Candidates were recommended by bakers, muleteers, barbers, and tavern keepers. One surviving endorsement reads, "The worshippers of Isis urge Gnaeus Helvius Sabinus as aedile." Another, Caecilius as idol. All the late-night drinkers ask for this. The informal, somewhat irreverent tone of these endorsements suggests that Pompeian politics was a genuinely public affair, debated in the streets and taverns with real feeling. Pompeii's gladiatorial arena was one of the oldest surviving amphitheaters in the Roman world. The amphitheater of Pompeii was constructed around 70 BC, making it older than the Colosseum in Rome by approximately 140 years. It could hold approximately 20,000 spectators and was built into a corner of the city walls to take advantage of the natural slope of the ground for seating. Unlike later Roman amphitheaters, it had no underground passages or elaborate mechanical systems. It was a simpler, more direct structure, built with private funds by two local magistrates. A notable brawl occurred here in 59 AD, described by the historian Tacitus in his Annals, when Pompeian spectators and visitors from the neighboring city of Nuceria clashed during gladiatorial games. The conflict escalated from taunts to stone throwing to drawn weapons. The Roman Senate investigated, and Pompeii was banned from holding gladiatorial games for 10 years. The ban appears to have been lifted ahead of schedule, likely through the combined influence of the earthquake's social disruption. Some scholars suggest the intercession of figures with connections to the imperial court. A fresco depicting this clash still survives, painted on the wall of a private house near the amphitheater. The houses of wealthy Pompeians were designed not just for comfort, but as instruments of social performance. The typical elite Pompeian house was built around a central atrium, an open-roofed hall that collected rainwater in a shallow pool. Visitors entering from the street would walk through a narrow entrance corridor and then emerge into this spacious, decorated hall. The effect was deliberate, a revelation of wealth and taste, designed to impress clients and social rivals from the moment they stepped inside. Beyond the atrium lay a semi-open reception room where the homeowner would receive visitors. Behind that, a garden colonnade provided private green space and additional rooms. The walls of the finest houses were covered in frescoes, mythological scenes, garden landscapes, architectural illusions, still lifes. The floors were mosaics of extraordinary precision. One of Pompeii's most celebrated homes, the House of the Faun, covered an entire city block and contained the spectacular Alexander mosaic, depicting Alexander the Great's battle against the Persian king Darius. Now in Naples, religion was woven into every corner of Pompeian life, not as a distant institution, but as an immediate, daily presence. Nearly every Pompeian house contained a lararium, a small household shrine dedicated to the lares, the protective spirits of the family and its property. These shrines ranged from simple painted alcoves in modest homes to elaborate miniature temples in wealthier ones. Most contained small bronze or terracotta figurines, along with offerings of food, wine, and incense. The city also maintained temples to Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva, as well as to Apollo, Venus, and Isis. The Temple of Isis was particularly significant. After the earthquake of 62 AD destroyed it, the entire structure was rebuilt within a few years, funded largely by a freedman named Numerius Papidius Celsinus, whose young son Ampliatus received a seat on the town council as reward for his family's generosity. The earthquake of 62 AD was a significant event that left much of Pompeii still under reconstruction when Vesuvius erupted 17 years later. On February 5th, 62 AD, a major earthquake struck the city and surrounding region. Ancient sources, including the philosopher Seneca, describe widespread destruction. Buildings collapsed, water systems ruptured, and livestock near Vesuvius reportedly died from underground gases, which geologists now recognize as signs of volcanic unrest building beneath the mountain. 17 years later, much of Pompeii was still being restored. Archaeologists have found numerous buildings in various stages of reconstruction, with stacked building materials ready for ongoing work. The Forum's temples were still being repaired. Private homes showed fresh plasterwork over earthquake damage. In a 2024 study published in the journal Frontiers in Earth Science, researchers analyzing 2 skeletons found in a Pompeian building concluded that their deaths were caused not by volcanic debris alone, but by wall collapses triggered by earthquakes occurring simultaneously with the eruption, adding another layer of complexity to our understanding of that final day. The date of Vesuvius's eruption has been quietly reassessed by modern scholarship. For centuries, the standard date given for the eruption was August 24th, 79, a D, taken from letters written by Pliny the Younger to the historian Tacitus. However, accumulating archaeological evidence has led most scholars to favor a date in late October 79, a D instead. The evidence is considered persuasive. Excavators have found autumn fruits, pomegranates, figs, and almonds preserved in the debris. suggesting harvest season was underway. Victims wore heavy woolen cloaks, inconsistent with summer heat. A coin found in the ruins bears a date that, if correctly interpreted, places its minting after August 79 AD. The manuscripts of Pliny's letters contain variant readings of the date, and historians now widely believe a scribal copying error early in the manuscript tradition shifted it. Pompeii was likely buried on a cool autumn afternoon, not in the August sun. The mountain gave indications before it erupted, which, with the benefit of hindsight, were recognizable. In the weeks and days before the eruption, Pompeii experienced a series of minor earthquakes. Ancient sources indicate the ground had been trembling on and off for days. Springs and wells in the area went dry or changed their taste, likely because volcanic gases were affecting the groundwater. Some animals reportedly behaved with unusual restlessness in the days before the eruption. But the Romans of Campania were accustomed to minor tremors. Pliny the Younger, writing from Misenum, 18 miles away, noted that the earthquakes had been going on long enough that they were not particularly alarming, because they are frequent in Campania. Vesuvius itself was not recognized as a volcano in the modern sense. It had been quiet for so long, roughly 800 years since its last significant eruption, that it was considered simply a mountain. Poets praised the vineyards on its slopes. Farmers planted right up to the summit. The potential danger was invisible because it was without precedent in living memory. The eruption began, according to the best current evidence, around 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Pliny the Younger, then 17 years old and staying with his uncle at the naval base of Misenum, observed a cloud rise from the direction of the mountain, unlike anything he had seen before. He described it as a column of gas and debris shooting upward, spreading at altitude like the trunk and branches of a pine tree. What scientists today call a Plinian eruption column, named in his honor. The column climbed to an estimated 18 to 20 miles in height. Ash and pumice began falling on Pompeii, carried by the prevailing wind. The accumulation was gradual rather than uniform. Archaeological evidence suggests first an inch, then 6 inches, then a foot and more. Roofs began to groan under the weight. Citizens grabbed valuables and moved toward the city gates. Others retreated into cellars or upper rooms, waiting for what they hoped would pass. This first phase of the eruption, the column phase, lasted approximately 18 hours, giving many citizens time to leave. Pliny the Elder died during the eruption, attempting to rescue friends across the bay, and his death was witnessed and recorded with care by his nephew, Pliny the Elder, the great Roman naturalist and author of the encyclopedic Natural History, was also commander of the Roman fleet at Misenum. When the eruption began, he initially dispatched ships to help coastal communities. Then a written plea arrived from a woman named Rectina, wife of Tascius Pomponianus, asking for rescue from her villa near the mountain. Pliny changed course and sailed directly toward the disaster. His ships navigated through falling pumice and floating volcanic debris. He eventually reached the town of Stabiae, where he spent the night at a friend's house. According to his nephew's account, Pliny slept through much of the night's disturbance. The next morning, the air was thick with volcanic gases. He collapsed on the beach and died. Pliny the Younger, who recorded the account, described his uncle as overwhelmed by the fumes, noting that he had always had a sensitive respiratory tract. Scholars have debated the precise cause of death, whether asphyxiation, toxic volcanic gases, or cardiac stress from exertion, but none can be confirmed with certainty from the surviving letters. He was in his 56th year. His nephew survived to write the only eyewitness record of the eruption that has come down to us. The flows of superheated material that ultimately destroyed Pompeii arrived in the early morning hours of the second day. After the long night of pumice fall, the eruption column became unstable. When such columns collapse, they send avalanches of gas, ash, and rock racing down the slopes of the volcano. The temperature inside these flows can be severe. Modern reconstruction of the events suggests that several such flows moved through Pompeii in rapid succession, and the physics of such events, studied by volcanologists, indicate that those who remained in the city would not have survived the thermal and atmospheric conditions. Buildings that had withstood the pumice fall collapsed under the force of the flows. A 2024 study in Frontiers in Earth Science found that earthquakes triggered by the volcanic activity itself contributed to building collapses simultaneously with the flows, making the final hours more complex than previously understood. The city was buried under approximately 14 to 20 feet of volcanic material by the time the eruption ended. The plaster casts of Pompeii's victims are among the most moving objects in the archaeological world, and they were created through a technique that Giuseppe Fiorelli perfected in the 19th century. When Vesuvius buried Pompeii, organic material eventually decomposed inside the hardened volcanic matrix, leaving hollow voids in the exact shape of the objects that had been there. Building on earlier, less successful experiments by previous excavation directors, Fiorelli perfected a technique, first successfully applied on February 5, 1863, of pouring liquid plaster into these cavities and carefully removing the surrounding ash to reveal the cast within. The result was remarkable. The casts revealed not just the shapes of bodies, but details of posture and, in some cases, the clothing and belongings people carried. Modern technology has advanced the method further. Archaeologists now use liquid resin rather than plaster, and CT scanning has revealed preserved bones and other details inside the casts, without disturbing the exterior. Most of Pompeii's population survived the eruption. This is perhaps the most quietly remarkable fact about the disaster, and recent archaeology has made it increasingly clear. Of a population historians estimate at between 11,000 and 20,000, only approximately 1,150 bodies have been found in the city itself. Even accounting for victims in the third of the city still unexcavated, the numbers strongly suggest that the majority of residents left during the 18-hour pumice fall phase, before the fatal flows arrived. Those who died were disproportionately those who waited too long, those who could not move, or those who sheltered in enclosed spaces, hoping to outlast what they believed was a passing disturbance. Professor Stephen Tuck of Miami University, drawing on documentary evidence published alongside recent excavations, traced dozens of Pompeian families by their distinctive names into Roman communities further north and west. Many survivors resettled in towns along the Bay of Naples, in Ostia, and in Rome itself. Some went on to establish temples and businesses in their new communities. The story of Pompeii did not end with the mountain. Pompeii was known in the ancient world, but then it was forgotten, buried and largely unmentioned for over 1,600 years. The Roman Empire made efforts to aid survivors and resettle the region, but the city itself was too deeply buried to excavate with ancient technology. Over centuries, the site was gradually forgotten. The Latin name faded from maps. New settlements grew up nearby, but the buried city beneath their feet was at most a vague memory. Pompeii's rediscovery began almost accidentally in 1592, when an engineer named Domenico Fontana, digging a canal to redirect the Sarno River, struck ancient walls and inscriptions underground. The find was largely noted and then set aside. In 1748, Spanish engineer Roque Joaquín de Alcubierre resumed systematic digging in the area, initially searching for sculptural objects to furnish a royal palace, and gradually recognized that he was excavating not scattered artifacts, but an intact ancient city. The world's response, when news reached European capitals, was one of deep fascination. The Enlightenment was hungry for classical antiquity, and here was the ancient world, not reconstructed or imagined, but physically present. The discovery of Pompeii transformed the Western world's relationship with antiquity and effectively created the foundations of modern archaeological practice. Before Pompeii, excavation of ancient sites was essentially object hunting. Valuable items were extracted and removed. Context was destroyed without record. Giuseppe Fiorelli, who became superintendent of excavations in 1860, introduced a fundamentally different approach. He excavated systematically, recorded the precise position and context of every object found, and developed the plaster cast technique. Fiorelli divided the city into numbered regions, city blocks, and individual buildings, a system still used today. His approach meant that Pompeii was excavated not as a source of decorative objects, but as a complete living environment, where the relationship between objects and spaces could tell stories no individual artifact could tell alone. Every carefully excavated site in the world today traces its intellectual lineage, however distantly, back to the methods first applied to that ash-covered city in Campania. By now, the shape of Pompeii's story is becoming clear. This was a city as ordinary and as layered as any living city, and its ordinariness is exactly what makes its preservation so quietly extraordinary. Pompeii does not survive because it was the greatest city in the Roman world. Rome, Alexandria, and Antioch were all larger, richer, more powerful. Pompeii survives because the ash fell at exactly the right density and at exactly the right temperature. Warm enough to preserve, cool enough not to incinerate. The city was sealed like a letter, addressed to a future reader who would not arrive for 17 centuries. That reader turned out to be us. And what the letter contains is not imperial proclamations or philosophical treatises. It is bakeries and bathhouses and love poems scratched on walls and children's drawings of gladiators. It is the absolute ordinariness of life, which turns out to be exactly what we needed to understand the ancient world. Imagine yourself walking through a Pompeian street in the last ordinary morning, before the column rose. Feel the rough basalt stones beneath your feet, worn smooth by 10,000 other feet before yours. Allow yourself to notice the scent of bread from a bakery 2 doors down, and the charcoal smoke from the food counter where the owner is warming the morning's stew. Hear the sound of a cart somewhere around the corner, the conversation between neighbors across the narrow street. These people had their worries. They had their hopes. They had children they loved and debts they owed, and neighbors they found difficult, and small pleasures they looked forward to at the end of a long day. They were not simple, or distant, or different from us in the ways that matter most. Breathe with them across the centuries. They built aqueducts and theaters and temples. They wrote on walls. And in the ordinary morning before everything changed, they did not know they were ancient. They simply lived. Breathe in that continuity. Breathe out the distance of time. Pompeii's bakeries are among the most complete and informative industrial sites ever excavated in the ancient world. More than 30 bakeries have been identified in the city. Each contained large circular millstones made of volcanic basalt, an upper stone that rotated over a stationary lower stone, driven by animals or human laborers. Grain was milled into flour, mixed, kneaded, shaped into round loaves, and baked in domed clay ovens. When archaeologists opened one oven in the bakery of Modestus, they found 81 preserved carbonized loaves, each round and divided into 8 segments for easy breaking. The bread was stamped with the baker's name, a form of identification nearly 2,000 years old. Pompeii had a sophisticated approach to managing its city traffic. Archaeological evidence indicates this may have been among the earliest known urban traffic management systems in the ancient world. Archaeologists studying the patterns of wheel ruts in Pompeii's basalt paving have identified evidence that certain streets appear to have been designated for one-directional movement only, with stone barriers and curb configurations guiding vehicles along prescribed routes. This interpretation remains under scholarly discussion, but the evidence for deliberate traffic management is considered compelling. The wheel ruts themselves, some worn more than 2 inches deep, record the passage of thousands of vehicles across decades, creating an inadvertent archive of daily commerce pressed into stone. The House of the Vetii is one of Pompeii's most celebrated homes, and it belonged not to the ancient aristocracy but to 2 freedmen who made their fortunes in trade. Aulus Vettius Restitutus and Aulus Vettius Conviva were freed slaves who became wealthy merchants. Their home, excavated and restored in the late 19th century, is a testament to the social mobility that Roman commerce could enable. The house features remarkable frescoes throughout, and the main dining room contains mythological scenes of exceptional artistry. The garden is ringed with fountains and bronze statues. These were men who had once been property, and they spent their wealth announcing to everyone who passed through their door that they had arrived. Pompeii's plaster casts are not only of people. Archaeologists have created casts of animals, furniture, and even the forms left by decomposed organic material. The same technique that preserved the shapes of human victims also captured the voids left by wooden furniture, roots, and other organic matter. Casts of dogs have been made, including one figure of a chained dog unable to flee. Casts of food have preserved the shapes of walnuts, figs, and loaves. One remarkable series of casts captured the collapsed form of a wooden roof, revealing details about ancient Roman construction techniques that could not have been recovered any other way. The lupanar, Pompeii's largest and most explicitly decorated brothel, has become one of the most visited structures in the excavations. The building contained 10 small rooms on 2 floors, each furnished with a stone bed and a masonry rest. The walls featured decorative paintings above each doorway, and an extensive quantity of graffiti covered the inner surfaces, including names, records of transactions, and what appear to be client comments. The establishment was staffed primarily by enslaved individuals, many from the Eastern Mediterranean. Study of the graffiti, combined with analysis of skeletal remains found nearby, has helped scholars understand something of the human realities behind what was, in Roman society, a legally permitted institution. In 2024, archaeologists in the Regio 9 excavation area discovered a room that the site's director described as one of the most moving finds in his professional life, precisely because it contained no treasures at all. The room was small, approximately 160 square feet, and appears to have served as both a sleeping space and a storage area for at least 3 people, likely enslaved workers who tended the adjacent stable. Inside, archaeologists found wooden bed frames, a chamber pot, a window latch, and personal belongings, including items of clothing and an amulet against misfortune. Director Gabriel Zuchtriegel described the find as significant for revealing the human experience of the most vulnerable members of ancient society, people who seldom appear in historical records. It was a room history had forgotten. The ash chose to preserve it. Pompeii's garden spaces were productive, status-conferring, and spiritually significant, far more than merely decorative. The largest private gardens in Pompeii were planted with roses, violet, irises, and fruit trees. Some gardens contained ornamental fish ponds. Others featured outdoor dining spaces shaded by pergolas where guests reclined on stone couches. Even in modest homes, a small garden plot created a symbolic and practical connection to the natural world. The volcanic soil of the region was so fertile that gardens were genuine sources of household food, supplementing purchased provisions with herbs, vegetables, and seasonal fruit. The colors of ancient Pompeii were far more vivid than the faded ruins visitors typically see today. When first excavated, Pompeian frescoes blazed with saturated reds, yellows, greens, blues, and blacks. Egyptian blue, one of the ancient world's great prestige pigments, decorated shrines and important rooms. A room excavated in 2024 during the ongoing Regio 9 digs featured walls in rare Egyptian blue, so well preserved that conservators described it as exceptional, even by Pompeian standards. The room, interpreted as a sacrarium or shrine space, featured female figures representing the 4 seasons, surrounded by allegorical imagery, all in colors that had not been seen in nearly 2,000 years. Children in Pompeii left their own mark on the archaeological record. In 2024, excavators working in a house called the House of the Second Last Supper found a series of charcoal sketches on unplastered walls at heights of roughly 6 to 20 inches above the floor. The sketches were identified as children's work based on their scale and style. They depicted gladiators in combat, hunters with animals, boxers, birds of prey, and scenes from sports games. Researchers from the University of Naples Federico II concluded that the drawings most likely reflected real observation, that children had attended the games and returned home to reproduce what they had seen on the nearest available surface. It is a gesture both timeless and specific. A child, a stick of charcoal, and a wall. Vesuvius is not only a historical subject, it remains active today and is considered one of the more closely monitored volcanoes in the world. Mount Vesuvius stands approximately 4,200 feet high and overlooks the densely populated Bay of Naples region, home today to roughly 3 million people. The volcano has had significant eruptions in 203 AD, 472 AD, 512 AD, and most recently in 1944, during the Allied campaign in Italy, when lava flows damaged several villages. Volcanologists monitor Vesuvius continuously. The scale of any future major eruption response would be one of the largest emergency operations in European history. The riot Pompeii's amphitheater witnessed in 59 AD was recorded in the Roman Senate's official proceedings, making it one of the few documented incidents of civic crowd violence to survive from the ancient world. Tacitus describes the conflict in his annals with some precision. It began with exchanges of insults between Pompeians and visitors from the neighboring town of Nuceria, escalated to thrown stones, and then became a broader clash in which many Nucerians were injured. The Nucerians appealed to Rome. The Senate investigated, and Pompeii was banned from gladiatorial games for 10 years. A fresco found in a house near the amphitheater depicts the clash in considerable detail, one of the only visual representations of urban civic conflict from the ancient Roman world. The Villa of the Mysteries at Pompeii contains one of the most studied and debated fresco cycles from the ancient world, located just outside the city walls. This large villa features a room whose walls are covered with a continuous frieze of nearly life-size figures, 29 in all, engaged in what appears to be an initiation ritual. The meaning of the scene has been discussed by scholars for over a century. The dominant interpretation sees it as depicting the initiation rites of the Dionysian mysteries, a secretive cult promising its initiates special knowledge and a transformed relationship with death and renewal. The figures include a winged form and a woman being unveiled before an overwhelming divine presence. The colors, particularly the deep red backgrounds, remain among the most vivid in surviving ancient painting. In 2025, excavations in Reggio IX produced a discovery recognized among the most significant archaeological finds of the year. A dining room with a Dionysian fresco cycle running across 3 walls. The house, named by archaeologists the Casa del Tiasso, meaning House of the Dionysian Procession, contained a vaulted banqueting room opening onto a garden. 3 walls were decorated with a continuous frieze of nearly life-size figures, satyrs, maenads, and other members of the divine retinue of Dionysus, god of wine. Researchers dated the frescoes to between 40 and 30 BC, meaning they had already been old for over 100 years when Vesuvius preserved them. Only 2 such Dionysian fresco cycles are now known from Pompeii, making this among the most significant art historical discoveries at the site in many decades. Pompeii had a functioning financial and record-keeping system, and its commercial networks extended far beyond Campania. Archaeologists have found evidence of money changers, tax collectors, and lending operations throughout the city. Wax tablets, recovered from the house of a banker named Lucius Caecilius Eucundus, preserve over 150 financial records. Receipts, loan agreements, and auction documents, dating from the decade before the earthquake of 62 AD. These tablets reveal a picture of a city deeply connected to the wider Roman economy, purchasing goods from distant provinces, financing construction, and managing obligations with considerable complexity. The tablets also suggest that the earthquake of 62 AD disrupted Pompeii's economic activity significantly. Several of Iucundus's records end abruptly around that date. And here, near the halfway point of our early journey, the evidence draws us toward a single truth. Pompeii was not a city outside of time. It was fully, complexly, and messily of its time, embedded in the Roman world. Its enslaved people and freedmen, its merchants and priests, its children drawing on walls, and its bankers tallying debts were all part of a civilization stretching from the coast of Britain to the deserts of Syria. Pompeii was simultaneously local and cosmopolitan, small enough that neighbors knew each other's names, and connected enough that its fish sauce fermented in kitchens from Spain to Egypt. What the ash preserved was not an exception. It preserved a representative slice of a world that is, in many ways, the world we still inhabit. You are still here, listening in the darkness, perhaps sharing this journey with another history lover who finds peace in the ruins of ancient places would be a gentle way to help this space grow. Thank you for being here. And now, back to the city and its stories. The Forum was the political, economic, and religious center of Pompeii, a large, open rectangle paved in white travertine, flanked by temples, civic buildings, and commercial spaces. At its northern end stood the temple to Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva. At its southern end, 3 halls housed the magistrates' offices and the local senate. Along the sides ran a covered colonnade sheltering markets and public spaces. The Forum was where elections were announced, where official weights and measures were kept, where public ceremonies took place, and where citizens gathered daily to conduct the ordinary business of civic life. Pompeii had at least 2 theatres, a large open theatre and a smaller covered one called the Odeon, reflecting the city's sustained engagement with theatrical culture. The large theatre could seat approximately 5,000 people and staged both Greek and Roman dramatic works. The Odeon, built around 80 BC and covered with a wooden roof, was a more intimate space used for musical performances and smaller dramatic pieces. The presence of 2 theatres in a relatively small city speaks to the cultural importance Pompeians placed on dramatic performance, not merely as entertainment, but as a form of community identity rooted in the Greek traditions that had shaped this region for centuries. Pompeii's food preservation and storage methods reveal a sophisticated approach to supply chain management, even without modern refrigeration. Large ceramic vessels with pointed bases were used to transport and store wine, olive oil, fish sauce, grain, and other commodities across the Mediterranean. In Pompeii's warehouses and cellars, these vessels were stored, tilted in sand, or placed in racks, keeping their contents stable. Many were labeled with painted inscriptions identifying the contents, their origin, their vintage, the name of the producer, and sometimes the shipper. This system allowed merchants and consumers to make informed choices in a world without standardized packaging, a form of product identification that functioned remarkably well across long distances. Lead was a pervasive material in Pompeii's water infrastructure, and its health effects on the city's population remain a subject of ongoing scholarly discussion. The city's water pipes were made of lead, and lead was also used in some cooking vessels and ceramic glazing. Roman writers of the period were aware that lead could be harmful in certain contexts. Yet its use continued throughout the empire. Scientific analysis of skeletal remains from Pompeii and Herculaneum has found elevated lead levels in some individuals, consistent with chronic exposure. Whether this contributed meaningfully to health outcomes across the population remains an open question, but it serves as a reminder that ancient urban living had its own invisible challenges, some recognized and others beyond the knowledge of the time. Pompeii's gladiators lived in a barracks complex adjacent to the large theatre, and their lives were considerably more structured than the popular image of arena warriors might suggest. The gladiatorial barracks contained cells arranged around a central courtyard where fighters trained, ate, and lived. Skeletal remains found in the barracks include individuals with healed injuries consistent with arena combat, fractures that had been set, cuts that had closed over. Medical care for gladiators was an economic consideration. These were significant investments. Ancient accounts suggest that gladiatorial trainers employed physicians specifically to tend to fighters. The goal was to produce compelling spectacle, not unnecessary injury. Fights to the death were the exception rather than the rule, and decisions about a defeated opponent rested with the crowd and the event's sponsor. Pompeii's Temple of Apollo is one of the oldest sacred spaces in the city, with a history stretching back before Roman rule by centuries. The temple stood in its own colonnaded precinct, adjacent to the Forum, and its history reaches to the 6th century BC, a time when Pompeii was still under strong Greek cultural influence. The cult of Apollo was among the earliest to be established here. In the temple's precinct, archaeologists have found objects spanning centuries, Italic, Greek, and Roman, layered in a material record of continuous worship at a single sacred place. The column bases and podium of the temple survive, along with copies of bronze statues of Apollo and Diana that once flanked the altar. The eruption also preserved evidence of what people took with them when they fled, revealing their priorities in the moments of crisis. Many of the human remains found in Pompeii were discovered with personal belongings, jewelry, coins, silverware, and keys. The presence of keys among victims' possessions suggests that many who died had intended to return. They locked their homes and left, expecting to come back when the disturbance passed. Bags of coins found near doorways suggest people gathered their savings on the way out. These choices, made in urgency, tell us something immediate and human about those final hours. The instinct to return, the refusal to believe the loss was permanent. The great Pompeian frescoes were painted using a technique called buon fresco, painting on wet plaster, that required considerable skill and planning. Fresco pigments are applied to fresh wet plaster, and as the plaster dries, the pigments bond chemically with it rather than simply resting on the surface. This means the artist had to work within the drying time of each plaster section, typically a few hours. Large fresco programs required elaborate advanced planning. The chemical bonding is precisely why many Pompeian frescoes, sealed under volcanic ash and protected from air and light, retained their color with such extraordinary intensity. What we see is not paint on a wall. It is color woven into stone. Some of the most affecting discoveries in Pompeii are not grand paintings or wealthy villas, but the smallest, most personal objects of daily life. Archaeologists have found children's toys, dolls made of bone or ivory, small carts, miniature vessels. They have found medical instruments, including bronze scalpels and probes of considerable quality. They have found intact dice, gaming boards scratched into stone steps, and writing tablets. One small terracotta figurine found in a house shows a woman nursing a child. Ordinary, intimate, entirely human. These objects were not made to last. They lasted only because the mountain preserved everything equally: the imperial mosaic and the child's clay doll, the temple frieze and the bronze needle still threaded with linen. Halfway through our journey, one truth is becoming clear. Pompeii is not just a window into the ancient world. It is a mirror. Every shop and bakery, every election notice and love note, every locked door and dropped coin speaks not just of people who lived 2,000 years ago, but of something persistent in human experience. The desire to provide for family, to be recognized by neighbors, to leave some mark that says, "I was here." The ash fell on ordinary people, living ordinary lives. And that ordinariness is the most quietly extraordinary thing about Pompeii. Imagine an excavation trench, layers of earth and time stacked like pages in a slow book. Each layer holds a different era. Pottery fragments from one century, ash from another, coins, bones, seeds, the faint impression of a sandal in clay. Archaeologists work in stillness here, brushing dust with fine tools, recording the precise position of each fragment before it is moved. Most of history lies buried. Most moments left no trace at all. But some objects survived. A bread stamp, a ring, a child's toy, a bronze key. Silent witnesses speaking across time to anyone patient enough to listen. You, too, have layers. Memories gathered over time. Experiences held quietly in the body. Breathe deeply. Allow yourself to settle now. Like sediment, like volcanic ash gently laid down over a sleeping city, becoming something that protects rather than destroys. Breathe slowly. Feel yourself going deeper. Pompeii's wine culture was developed enough to support what historians describe as something like early consumer discernment among its residents. Graffiti on the walls of taverns and wine bars preserve opinions about specific establishments. The city had over 200 bars and wine shops, one for every 50 to 100 residents. The vineyards of Campania produced wines of varying quality, and Pompeians, the graffiti suggests, were not hesitant to share their views. Herculaneum, the smaller city buried alongside Pompeii, was overwhelmed by different volcanic forces, and its preservation offers a distinctive complement to Pompeii's record. Where Pompeii was covered primarily by falling pumice and ash, Herculaneum was engulfed by flows that carbonized organic material rather than simply burying it. This means that Herculaneum preserved actual ancient wood, furniture, shelving, boats found on the ancient beach. The experience of each city's final hours was geologically different, though equally complete. The Herculaneum Papyri, a library of carbonized scrolls found in a villa at the site, became one of the great scholarly puzzles of the modern era, their pages too fragile for centuries to open without destruction. In recent years, a remarkable application of imaging science has made those scrolls partially readable. The carbonized Herculaneum Papyri, long considered beyond reach, have become accessible through a project called the Vesuvius Challenge, bringing together imaging scientists and classical scholars. Beginning in 2023, significant portions of previously unread text were successfully decoded using computed tomography and artificial intelligence analysis. Passages from Epicurean philosophical writing, discussing, among other things, the nature of pleasure, were among the first recovered. The project continues. Each decoded scroll represents text buried at the time of the eruption and invisible to human eyes for nearly 2,000 years. Pompeii's textile industry left physical evidence in the form of large washing and production establishments called fulonicae. Fulleries in Pompeii processed wool, cleaned garments, and produced finished textiles. The process used a mordant solution in large treading vats, where workers would process cloth with their feet. The largest fullery in Pompeii, the Fulonica di Stephanus, occupied an entire former house, its domestic rooms converted into industrial spaces. Frescoes, found in another Pompeian fullery, show workers at various stages of the textile process. One of the only surviving depictions of an ancient industrial workplace in ancient art. The Garden of the Fugitives contains the largest single grouping of plaster casts in Pompeii. 13 individuals who died together as they sought a way out. These individuals were found in what was an ancient garden at the moment of the eruption. They had moved together toward what they hoped was an exit, following the garden wall. The surge reached them before they could find one. The casts show individuals in various positions, some lying flat, some with hands raised, some who appear to have been close to others in their final moments. They are displayed where they were found, beneath a protective structure, in the positions of their deaths. Standing in that garden, visitors often grow very quiet. The streets of Pompeii preserve stories of daily commerce in the wear patterns left on buildings at their corners. The corners of buildings at Pompeian intersections show characteristic wear. Stone surfaces smoothed and shaped by the repeated passage of cartwheels cutting close. Delivery routes can be reconstructed from these patterns. The locations of small holes cut in building facades reveal where merchants tied animals during deliveries. Metal rings, embedded in curbs, mark hitching points. Election notices painted near the most traveled intersections suggest that Pompeian political supporters understood, as modern campaigners do, the value of placing their message where the most people would pass. Pompeii's gladiatorial tradition was international. Fighters came from across the Roman world and beyond. Different gladiatorial styles were associated with different regions and equipment. The Thraex fought in the Thracian style, with a curved sword and small shield. The Murmillo wore a fish-crested helmet. The Retiarius fought with a net and trident. Gladiatorial graffiti in Pompeii records fighters from Spain, Gaul, and the Eastern Mediterranean. Some became locally famous enough that their portraits were scratched on walls as expressions of admiration, the ancient equivalent of a portrait pinned to a wall. The ancient Romans had a well-developed understanding of leisure, and Pompeii gives us an unusually complete picture of how Romans spent their time when they were not working. Beyond the baths and amphitheatre, Pompeians played dice and board games in taverns. They attended theatrical performances. They visited the forum to hear news. They dined elaborately, both at home and as guests. They maintained gardens. They read. since literacy was higher in Pompeii than average estimates for the ancient world, as evidenced by the sophistication of graffiti at every social level. They celebrated religious festivals throughout the year, each associated with processions, communal meals, and public gatherings. Archaeological evidence suggests that the earthquake of 62 AD triggered significant changes in property ownership within Pompeii. The damage caused by the earthquake disrupted the financial position of several established families, some of whom appear to have sold properties at reduced prices in the years that followed. Analysis of building ownership in the city suggests that the period between 62 and 79 AD saw meaningful upward mobility among wealthy freedmen and merchants, who acquired prominent properties formerly held by older families. The nouveau riche moved into houses decorated in traditional styles, or redecorated them entirely, creating the layered archaeological record that makes individual houses so revealing of social history. The city's water fountains functioned as far more than drinking points. They were gathering places where social life was shaped, with fountains placed roughly every 320 feet throughout the city. Pompeians would have encountered their neighbors at the water supply multiple times each day. This daily routine created predictable gathering moments where news traveled, connections formed, and community cohered. Some scholars have argued that the public fountain was as socially significant in Pompeii as the forum or the baths, a democratic necessity that brought together social groups that might otherwise have had little regular contact. The Via dell'Abbondanza, Pompeii's main commercial street, was a place of considerable sensory life. This thoroughfare ran east-west through the center of the city, flanked on both sides by shops with wide open fronts, their counters at the sidewalk's edge. Merchants called out from their stalls. The scent of bread and fermented fish mingled with charcoal smoke. Street shrines painted on corner walls marked intersections. Political notices competed for wall space with announcements of gladiatorial games. A person walking this street would have moved through color, commerce, and the press of neighbors. The essential character of that scene is not entirely foreign to street life still found in Mediterranean cities today. Pompeii was a multicultural city. Its population included people from across the Roman Empire and beyond. The cults active in Pompeii included the Egyptian goddess Isis, the Syrian goddess Cybele, and inscriptions suggest the presence of a Jewish community as well. Greek was spoken alongside Latin. Freed slaves from Greece, Asia Minor, and Egypt had risen to economic prominence in the city's commercial life. Graffiti in Greek survives on Pompeian walls. The city was, by ancient standards, a meeting point of the known world, connected by trade, migration, and the administrative reach of empire. The Temple of Isis in Pompeii was one of the most completely preserved ancient religious sanctuaries discovered in the modern era, and its excavation in the 1760s caused considerable fascination across Europe. It was among the first major Pompeian buildings to be systematically uncovered, and its near-complete preservation gave European visitors their first concrete encounter with the physical reality of an ancient religious space. The Austrian composer Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart visited Naples and Pompeii in 1770, at the age of 14. Some scholars have suggested that the imagery of Egyptian mystery cults, made vivid to European audiences through this excavation, may have contributed to the atmosphere of his later opera, The Magic Flute, though the direct connection remains a matter of scholarly interpretation rather than documented record. The bodies found in Pompeii have have been studied using increasingly precise technology, including computed tomography scanning that has revealed information about individuals' health, diet, and origins. Studies of teeth have allowed researchers to determine where individuals spent their childhood. Chemical signatures in dental enamel reflect the water's mineral composition during the years of tooth formation and can be matched to specific geographic regions. Some individuals found in Pompeii appear to have spent their childhoods far outside the region, in North Africa, in Greece, or in the Eastern Mediterranean, confirming the city's cosmopolitan character. Modern isotope analysis indicates that dietary differences between social groups were real and measurable, with higher status individuals showing better nutritional outcomes than those assumed to be enslaved or among the very poor. More than a third of Pompeii remains unexcavated. Modern archaeology has, in many cases, chosen to leave it deliberately buried. Advances in conservation science have made archaeologists careful about further excavation. The great complexity of Pompeii is that excavation exposes the ruins to the elements, to rain, frost, erosion, and the physical presence of millions of visitors. The unexcavated portions of the city, still protected by their ash and earth cover, are in many ways better preserved than sections exposed in the 18th and 19th centuries. Modern practice emphasizes conservation, restoration, and non-invasive technologies, such as ground-penetrating radar and multispectral imaging, that allow the city to be studied without being disturbed. The next generation of discoveries may come not from shovels, but from sensors. The Pompeian electoral system produced some of the most candid political endorsements in the ancient record. Campaign notices painted on Pompeian walls endorsed candidates from conventional and unconventional sources alike. Professional groups endorsed candidates. Social clubs endorsed candidates. Friends and neighbors endorsed candidates. And in some cases, the endorsement seems deliberately playful, recommending candidates from groups like all the late-night drinkers or the ball players. Whether these were expressions of genuine irreverence or something else entirely remains uncertain. What is clear is that the Pompeian electorate was engaged and opinionated. The survival of Pompeian graffiti represents one of the most extensive collections of ordinary written language from the ancient world. The more than 11,000 inscriptions catalogued from Pompeii include not just political notices, but Latin poetry, copied passages from Virgil and Ovid, mathematical calculations, gladiatorial statistics, personal names, and declarations of feeling. One reads, "Health to you, Victoria, and wherever you are, may you sneeze sweetly." Another, "Satura was here on September 3rd. These inscriptions are not curated literature. They are the unsorted linguistic output of a functioning city, unguarded and immediate. Pompeii had a formal legal and judicial structure embedded in its urban geography. The Basilica, a large hall at the southwestern corner of the Forum, served as Pompeii's law court, where civil and criminal cases were heard. The building's interior was designed for public proceedings, with a raised platform at one end from which magistrates presided. Legal proceedings in Roman cities were public affairs, held in open spaces, attended by crowds, and conducted before audiences who participated openly. The Pompeian Basilica, built around 120 BC, is one of the oldest surviving examples of this building type. which would eventually shape the form of the Christian Church. The agricultural land around Pompeii, preserved beneath the eruption debris, is now being examined using modern scientific methods. Recent excavations in the suburban areas outside Pompeii's walls have identified ancient field systems, rows of furrows, planting holes, and irrigation channels preserved beneath the volcanic deposit. Pollen analysis and botanical remains have allowed archaeologists to identify specific crops: wine grapes on terraced plots, olives and figs in garden spaces, and what appears to be a large-scale cultivation of artichokes in fields near the city's eastern edge. The volcanic soil was understood by Roman farmers to be extraordinarily fertile, a paradox that kept people living in the shadow of a mountain that would eventually transform their world. The most recent major excavation program, known as the Great Pompeii Project, has produced a new generation of discoveries that continues to reshape the story. Launched with European Union funding around 2012 and extending to the present, the Great Pompeii Project was designed primarily to stabilize and conserve existing excavations, many of which were at risk. But conservation work involves excavation of previously unexamined areas, and the project has produced remarkable finds. The slave quarters of Reggio IX, the Thermopolium of Reggio V, the Blue Sacrarium, the Casa del Tiasso's Dionysian frescoes, and many smaller discoveries. The project has also revealed how much earlier excavations missed or inadequately recorded. Pompeii is still very much in the process of being understood. And now, near the three-quarter mark of our journey, the deepest truth of Pompeii begins to speak. Not about Romans, but about us. Every locked door tells us humans expect a return. Every coin clutched in a fleeing hand tells us humans value what they have built. Every election notice tells us humans want to choose who leads them. Every love poem scratched into plaster tells us humans need to say to someone, to the world, to the future, that they felt something, that they were here, that they mattered. You carry Pompeii in you not because you have studied it. You carry it because you are made of the same substance as those people, the same need to be known, to leave a mark, to be connected. The ash preserved their city. Time connects you to their lives. Empires rise and fall, like breathing. Pompeii rose from Oscan villages on a riverbank. It absorbed the Greeks, the Samnites, the Romans. It grew into a city of bathhouses and theaters and painted walls. And then the mountain spoke. And in less than 24 hours, a world that had been building for 800 years was buried under 20 feet of volcanic stone. But something survived the burial. Not the city itself, but the idea of the city. The memory of ordinary people living ordinary lives. The knowledge that civilization is not made by the powerful alone, but by bakers and painters, by children drawing on walls, by people who left a key in a lock and expected to come home. Your life is a cycle too, rising and falling, gaining and losing. Nothing permanent except the fact of living and of leaving traces. Allow yourself to breathe into that truth. Breathe out any resistance. Empires fall. Moments pass. This, too, is temporary. And that, gently considered, is a peaceful thought. Modern Naples lies in Vesuvius's shadow still, and more than 3 million people live within the volcano's potential reach. The mountain is monitored continuously. Instruments in the ground measure every tremor. Scientists track the movement of material beneath the surface. Evacuation plans exist. The people who live there know the terrain. They have always known it. And yet, they remain. In the shadow of a mountain whose soil is so rich that vineyards grow on its slopes again, as they did before the mountain remembered what it was. The plaster casts of Pompeii are still being made. When new excavations open previously sealed areas, new voids are sometimes discovered. Hollow spaces in the volcanic matrix where organic material once was. Archaeologists continue to pour material into these cavities, and new casts emerge from the earth. Each one is a form that has not been seen in nearly 2,000 years. Each one is a person who baked bread and argued with neighbors and went to sleep one night, not knowing that the sleep would last for millennia. The bread found in Pompeii's ovens was still being baked when the eruption came. 81 carbonized loaves, each round and divided into segments, still sat in one bakery's oven when the ash fell. They are preserved in the Naples National Archaeological Museum. They will never be eaten, but they were meant to be. Someone kneaded that dough. Someone shaped those loaves. Someone set the oven temperature by feel and experience, and waited for the right moment. That morning, the moment never came. The bread waited, and the world changed, and the bread remained. The water in Pompeii's pipes stopped flowing on the day the eruption began. The aqueduct system was disrupted almost immediately. Springs upstream may have been affected by seismic activity. Across the city, water pressure dropped. Public fountains slowed. For a city whose daily rhythms were organized around water, this failure was one of the first signs that something was fundamentally different about that day. Some residents may have recognized it. Others may have thought it a passing disruption. The pipes in Pompeii are still there, still in the walls, still waiting for a pressure that will never return. The Garden of the Fugitives contains a pomegranate tree growing in the garden where 13 people died. It was planted by archaeologists as part of the restoration of ancient garden spaces. It grows in volcanic soil above the remains of those who tried to run. In autumn, the season when most scholars now believe the eruption occurred, the pomegranate fruits, red and heavy, in the old garden, above the old quiet. The soil only knows that it is fertile. Pompeii's election notices reveal that women, though they could not vote in the formal system, participated actively in political expression. At least 13 Pompeian election endorsements were written by women or attributed to women in the surviving graffiti. One reads, "Statia and Petronia recommend Marcus Caecilius and Lucius Albucius as aediles." Whether these women commissioned the painted notices themselves, or whether the attribution reflects something else, remains uncertain. What is clear is that women's voices were present on Pompeii's political walls, even in a system that excluded them from formal participation. The Roman alphabet in which these words are written was shaped, in large part, through the administrative infrastructure of the empire that Pompeii was part of. The letters you are hearing now trace their shapes back through centuries of scribal tradition to the Latin alphabet used in Pompeii's contracts, graffiti, and stone inscriptions. The letterforms on Pompeian walls are immediately legible to a modern eye. 2,000 years have passed, and the shapes of the letters endured. You are, in a real sense, hearing in the same alphabet as the Pompeian baker who stamped his name on his bread. The survivors of Pompeii carried the city with them wherever they went. Research tracing Pompeian family names through Roman documentary records after 79 AD has found evidence of survivors resettling across the region. Some maintained their social networks, connecting with other displaced Pompeian families. Some founded new institutions, temples and businesses in their new communities. They carried the customs and commercial practices of Pompeii into new places. In this way, Pompeii did not simply end, it dispersed. It became part of the wider Roman world. Seeds scattered by a volcano across the soil of Italy. Vesuvius erupted again in 203 AD, in 472 AD, in 512 AD, and most recently in 1944. The 472 AD eruption sent ash as far as Constantinople, more than 700 miles away, prompting prayers throughout the Eastern Roman Empire. The 1944 eruption, during the Allied campaign in Italy, produced lava flows visible to soldiers stationed below. Photographs from 1944 show the mountain in full eruption behind the ruins of Pompeii. Two events, 19 centuries apart, sharing the same landscape. The mountain makes no distinction between ancient and modern. The UNESCO World Heritage designation given to Pompeii in 1997 reflects a recognition that this city belongs not to Italy alone, but to all of humanity. More than 4 million visitors came to Pompeii in 2024, making it one of the most visited archaeological sites on Earth. People come from every country. They walk the same basalt stones the Romans walked. They stand in the same forum under the same mountain. They look at the plaster casts in the same stillness. And they leave carrying something they cannot entirely name. Your own city has its own version of Pompeii. The ordinary streets and structures that future generations will find extraordinary simply because they survived. The grocery receipt you no longer need. The worn step at the entrance to a familiar place. The mark someone left on a wall. These are the archaeology of now. They feel insignificant. They always do, from the inside. Every civilization believes its ordinary moments are too ordinary to preserve. Pompeii reminds us gently that ordinary moments are precisely what history needs most, and what it loses most completely. The bread in the Naples Museum is sometimes described as the oldest intentionally baked bread in the world that has survived with its original purpose still legible. People made bread before Pompeii. Much older bread exists, in fragments, in residue, in trace. But those 81 loaves were made on a specific morning, by a specific person, for a specific purpose, to be sold to the people of the city, who would carry them home and eat them with whatever was warm in the pot. That ordinary intentionality, that specific morning act, is what makes them unlike any other bread in existence. The volcanic soil that buried Pompeii feeds the same vineyards today that nourished the ancient city. Vesuvian wine is made today from grapes grown on the slopes of the mountain and in the plain below. The grape varieties have changed. The techniques have evolved. But the soil is the same soil. The ash that covered one civilization fertilized the next. The mountain destroyed and created simultaneously. It still does. Children in Pompeii drew on walls. Children in your city draw on walls. The impulse does not change. The hand finds a surface. The mark says, "I was here. I saw this. I felt something about it." The gladiators became whatever figures children admire now. The charcoal became other materials. The wall became other surfaces. But the gesture is identical. The human child leaving a trace in the world, claiming some small piece of the physical environment as a space for expression, saying without words what words have always struggled to say. The last people to die in Pompeii died near others. Among the plaster casts and skeletal remains in the ruins, there are individuals found in positions suggesting proximity to others in their final moments. A larger form near a smaller one, an adult with arms toward a child. Whether these were family members, strangers who found each other in the confusion, or simply people whose paths converged at the end, cannot be determined from the physical record alone. But the record shows that in those final moments, humans move toward each other rather than away. That impulse toward connection in difficulty may be the oldest thing about us. The Roman world that Pompeii was part of did not end with the volcano. Rome continued for centuries after 79 AD. The laws and administrative systems developed in cities like Pompeii continued to govern hundreds of millions of people. When Rome eventually receded, those systems were absorbed into the legal and ecclesiastical structures of medieval Europe, where they became the foundation of legal traditions that still, in recognizable form, shape Western societies today. Pompeii is not finished being excavated. The third of the city still buried may contain buildings, objects, and human remains that will reshape portions of what we think we know. Ground-penetrating radar surveys have revealed building outlines not yet investigated. New technology, including artificial intelligence analysis of imaging data and molecular archaeology, promises to unlock information from previously excavated materials that earlier methods could not access. The city is a library that is still being read. Every visitor who walks Pompeii's streets today walks where someone else walked whose name is not recorded. The person who wore a path smooth on those stones, who leaned against that doorway, who paused at that fountain to fill a vessel. They are not in the history books. They had no monuments. They left only the wear of their passage in the stone, the faint trace of their presence in the soil, the shape of their absence in the hardened ash. They were ordinary. They are gone, and their city stands. The ash that buried Pompeii is still there, compressed into stone beneath the streets and buildings that have been excavated. Walk through the modern excavations of Pompeii, and you are walking through a landscape that is simultaneously ancient and geological. The volcanic material that covered the city also forms the ground beneath your feet. You are, in a real sense, walking on the substance that preserved what you have come to see. The destruction and the preservation are the same material. There is no separating them. Pompeii teaches us that a city is not its buildings. It is its people. And when the people scatter, the buildings are only walls. Without the baker who made the bread is only carbon. Without the gladiator who won his freedom, the wooden sword of liberation is only splinters. Without the child who drew on the wall, the drawing is only marks. The buildings survived because the ash preserved them. But what we come to Pompeii to find is not the buildings. We come to find the people who are no longer there. And sometimes, if we are very still, we find them. A city that rose from a river plain, gathered centuries of human effort into its stones, was sealed in a single afternoon, and given, intact, to the future, does not survive by accident. It survives because the ordinary things people built and used and touched and left behind were worth preserving. The key found with a skeleton near the Nucerian gate may be the most quietly human object in all of Pompeii. A simple iron key, still held in the hand of someone who never made it out. That person locked a door. That person intended to return. The key was not symbolic. It was practical, urgent, ordinary. It belongs to someone who believed in tomorrow. And tomorrow, for that person, did not come. But the key endures, and the faith it represents, that the door will open again, that life continues, that tomorrow is worth preparing for, that faith endures too. The Pompeian night sky, in those last ordinary nights before the eruption, would have been extraordinary. Before modern light pollution, the stars above the Bay of Naples were dense and brilliant. The Milky Way, visible as a broad river of light across the darkness. Pompeians, navigated by those stars, named them, assigned them to their gods. The same stars are still there, changed slightly by 20 centuries of stellar drift, but still there, still burning over the same bay, over the mountain that buried the city that watched them. The sky is one of the few things connecting you directly and without mediation to those people. On those ordinary nights, the word Pompeii has entered the modern world as a concept, a shorthand for the impossible survival of the ordinary. When scientists discover a forest preserved in volcanic ash, they call it a Pompeii of plants. When a medieval village is found intact beneath a landslide, the same comparison reaches for itself. The city has become a metaphor, and a measure of what it means for ordinary things to outlast the extraordinary forces that tried to erase them. That a city of bakers and election notices and graffiti love notes should become a universal symbol of preservation is itself a kind of miracle. The ordinary became the metaphor for what lasts. Pompeii's excavation is still ongoing, and each year, something new comes to light. The Blue Shrine Room of 2024, the Dionysian fresco cycle of the Casa del Tiasso in 2025, named among the year's most significant global archaeological discoveries. Charcoal drawings by children, a construction site frozen mid-project, suburban field systems recording what the farmers grew. Each find reshapes a corner of the story. The city is not a closed book. It is a book still being read, still giving up sentences that were hidden in its pages, still capable of surprise. Pompeii did not survive despite being ordinary. It survived because it was ordinary. The great cities of the ancient world, Rome, Alexandria, Carthage, were too large, too important, too continuously inhabited to freeze in time. They were rebuilt, renovated, built over again. Their ancient layers lie buried beneath millennia of subsequent lives. Pompeii was small enough, and its destruction complete enough, that the ordinary morning of one autumn day was sealed intact and given to the future. The ash preserved what history forgets, that civilization is made not by emperors, but by every person who baked bread and drew on walls and locked a door and expected to come home. You are that person. You have always been that person. And you are, tonight, the future that Pompeii was sealed for. You have traveled far tonight, across 800 years of Pompeian history, through the long silence of 16 centuries, and into the light of the excavations that brought the city back to the world's attention. You have walked streets worn smooth by 10,000 other feet. You have heard the voices scratched into plaster walls. You have seen the bread that waited in an oven for an afternoon that never ended. You have stood at the edges of that last ordinary morning, when the mountain finally remembered what it was, and everything that had been ordinary became extraordinary simply by stopping. These ancient walls have faded, but their echoes remain. In the legal systems that govern modern courts, in the alphabet, these words are spoken in the volcanic soil that still feeds vineyards on the slopes of a mountain that is not finished. Pompeii reminds us that civilization is made of ordinary mornings, of bread and water and election notices and children's drawings and doors expected to open again tomorrow. What the people of Pompeii worried about echoes in our concerns. What they loved has not changed shape, only costume. Without remembering them, we forget that we too are someone's ancient ancestors, that our ordinary mornings are being stored somehow in the record of the world. You are not separate from Pompeii. You are its continuation. The alphabet you hear is theirs. The desire to leave a mark on a wall. Your name. Your thought. Proof that you were here. That desire moves in you as it moved in them. Ancient Pompeians wondered, sometimes, if anyone would remember them. You remember them now. You walked their streets tonight, heard their voices, felt the shape of their world. Someday, perhaps, someone will walk the traces of our time with the same quiet wondering. Allow yourself to rest in this continuity. You belong to something older than empires, deeper than ash, more persistent than stone. Breathe slowly and let go. A gentle share with another history lover who needs rest tonight would be a kind way to help this sanctuary grow. One quiet gesture, one sleepy soul at a time. Thank you for traveling with me through that ancient, ordinary city. You have traveled far through time tonight, farther than most journeys take you. Allow yourself to let these thoughts of Pompeii, of its bakeries and bathhouses, its painted walls and plaster casts, its locked doors and dropped coins, to fade now, like ash settling slowly through still air, leaving only the quiet calm beneath. Let your breathing deepen. Let your body grow heavier, as if sinking gently into the same earth where that ancient city still rests, as if the volcanic ground is patient beneath you, as it has always been, holding everything that was ever placed upon it. Allow sleep to come now, gently. Let it carry you like a city sealed under ash, smoothly, completely, into a deep place where time no longer matters, and all that remains is the warmth of being here. If your eyes are still open, the next video is waiting for you, ready to continue the journey. But if they are closing, stay there. Stay in the darkness that feels safe and warm, the darkness that has always held the sleeping city. Tomorrow, Pompeii will still be there, still partly buried, still giving up its quiet secrets, one careful brushstroke at a time. The mountain will still be watching over the bay. The bread will still be in the museum, round and divided into 8, waiting for an afternoon that never came. But tonight Tonight belongs to stillness. Rest well, fellow time traveler. And remember, you are the continuation of an ancient story. One ordinary morning added to all the ordinary mornings that came before. Part of a record that is longer and stranger and more beautiful than any single life can hold. Fall asleep to ancient stories, where history meets sleep. Dream deeper with echoes from the past. Relax, listen, and drift into time. Good night.